Did you know that black women are better leaders? So says Curious Ben. While workplace abuse does not discriminate, people of color often experience the additional component of racism. In part two, we continue exploring its nuances and how current laws don't adequately provide protection. What are some of those other nuances, if you will, of a black woman that you have come to learn, but also based on your research as well, why we are better in positions of leadership?
So I believe, and this is a belief statement here, I think there's probably facts
Okay.
backing up, but we can talk about that in a minute, that
Okay.
well, I had a friend tell me when every young black girl is safe, the whole country will be safe. And what they meant is that young black girls are the least protected human out there. And so, in
Absolutely.
order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to grow in this country, I think black women have to learn a certain set of skills that just sets them up for success in any area of life. And here's what blows me away about black women and black men. From my experience, they have
Uh-huh.
been so generous with me and so understanding of the mistakes I've made that white people just wouldn't be. And so
Interesting.
I've had far more acceptance from black men and black women when I make a mistake because it's less that ego bullshit. And it's been
Yeah.
more about, and this gets into kind of capitalism and stuff like that, but I feel like white people measure their value by what they achieve and how they move up in life. Whereas for
Mhm.
me, my experiences with the black community has been relationship seems far more important.
Absolutely. It's relationship. That's really interesting that you have made that, that you have not stayed silent on that point, because I think it's true. You know, and maybe from a historical perspective too, and I don't know if you can unpack this, but we've always been the caretakers. Think
Mhm,
about slavery here in the
mhm,
US and really colonialism all around the world, is that we have been the caretakers. We've been the ones who have tried to create, not try, but have created masterpieces out of your mess, if you
mhm,
will. And yet we continue to thrive. We've had the old Negro spirituals, and our faith that have literally supported us so that we can continue to move forward in spite of. And
mhm,
yet, even to those people who have been oppressive against us, and I even personally, I've said, I understand that people can make mistakes. We are human. No one is perfect. But what I would rather do is be in conversation and relationship with someone and to say, this is why this is offensive. And for that person to sit back, to analyze themselves, to listen, to have a spirit of introspection, and to say, you know what? I'm sorry. I
mhm.
need to learn and I need to grow. That is for me a beginning of solving this. But again, as we've already said, white people, whatever, 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 don't want to do that because they are really in denial. But I really want to believe that, we're okay with having those conversations because we have it with each other all the time. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm sure your wife has probably told you. She comes home from work maybe and she says, you know what, I had this situation going on at the office, or she's talking to her girlfriends who are people of color, and we have these conversations all the time, but we're exhausted. That's the issue. We're tired. We
Mhm.
are exhausted. And so while we are perhaps, maybe, as you say, your research shows, the best leaders, we don't want to lead because leading comes with resistance, and it affects our mental health and our physical health as well.
Mhm.
So is
Yeah,
it worth it? It's not worth it for me.
I was on a call with a lady from Tanzania, and she was talking about a company she worked for, and she took over a leadership role from a white lady and found out she was getting paid one third the amount. And so
Mm-hmm.
here's the other atrocity: is even when black women get into leadership roles and should be paid three times the amount of their predecessor, they're then unequally paid for that position.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In my situation, as you may know, I was finally promoted to the 6 p.m. newscast, which is kind of like the big show, the show of record in the news business. And all of a sudden, after 15 years, finally getting the role, it was, well, you're not going to get paid what your co-anchor makes. You're not going to get paid what the meteorologist makes because you don't have a meteorology degree. All of a sudden, the rules began to change, the line began to change, and there was no fighting that. The conversation was, well, it's duties as assigned. So I was supposed to just be grateful that I was given a 6 p.m. show after 15 years and just go to work and not fight for what was just. How do we unpack that conversation? I mean, there's so many issues related to this, but how do we unpack that and let white men, because they're the ones who, for the most part, are running these corporations, understand how unfair this is, how discriminatory it is. They know, I know they know. I'm still trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. See, there I am.
Yeah, I think so. White people do this thing, right, where they technicalize stuff in order to cover up their abusive behavior. And so it's one of the issues I have is like in domestic violence, we don't let abusive men define what domestic violence is, because if we did, it would be a shit show. They'd be like, oh, this isn't abusive. This isn't abusive. But yet with racism, it's almost like we're allowing white people to define what's racist and what's unfair.
Yes. I've been saying that for the longest. I mean, think about this. I'm sorry for screaming, but it just hit the nerve for me. All of a sudden, Rico and Leo are running, going, who's here? What? But that's so true. Think about this. So from a discrimination standpoint, there's so many people who are people of color who are experiencing discrimination in the workplace. When they go to file a lawsuit, presently speaking, we're told, well, discrimination can only be proved by two things. There was a noose on your desk or they called you the N-word. And my point has always been that does not define racism. And why are we allowing white men and white women to define what racism is? That just befuddles me. And so as we're working with end workplace abuse, we're really trying to make sure that we have laws that really have kept up with the time, that it includes the bullying, the microaggressions, and that the aggregate, if you will, of circumstances will rise and does rise to discrimination. But yet those are the only two reasons, or the only two things the two things we have to prove. That does not define racism. And so is it okay for me to say, white people, you don't have standing in this conversation, and the laws need to change?
One of the tools that white people use to protect themselves, which is we use binary definitions of problem behaviors. So if I were to say to you, like, do you have a drinking problem? It's a yes or no question, right? And people don't look at that as a spectrum. Like there's so many levels of drinking issues. But yet we all think of someone who drinks more than us, who has more issues than us, and say, no, that's a drinking problem. And I'm not there yet, so I don't have that issue. So when white people think about racism, they think about people being hung. They don't think about all these levels of racism. And they'll look at someone who's a member of the KKK, who I've worked with, and they'll say, that's racist, not the crazy shit I'm doing in the office, Black Lives Hell, but that is racist. And so this is how white people protect themselves. They use binary definitions rather than spectrum definitions of racism.
So true. You know, it's interesting. I made a post on my Instagram page one day just talking about, my new life and how I'm finally beginning to thrive. And some white woman said, Andrea, we miss you on TV. Like, we so miss you. And we're happy, and we're happy that you found a new life and that you're happy and thriving, but just drop the race card. Oh, man. Woo. Man.
My people are so much.
I did respond to the little old lady, and I said, respectfully, there's no such thing as the race card. And yet I hear that phrase being used all the time by white people. And I see there's no such thing as racism or race card. It really is racism. But to say racism, as we've talked about earlier, is that no one wants to be called a racist. And that's one of those other things that I just want people to stop using, stop saying the race card, because there's no such thing. Like, again, what do I gain by going, here's my race card, I'm going to pop it down on the table and use it? I get nothing. I gain nothing. There's nothing that I get that is beneficial by so-called using the race card. What I'm telling you is what you're doing, how you're treating me is racism. It is prejudice. It is wrong.
So white people use the Darvo response, right? Which is deny, then accuse, and then reverse the victim offender order. And so I was talking about Darvo with a white person, and they're like, Ben, that's what narcissists use. That's a symptom of narcissistic personality. I'm like, You're almost there, buddy. You've almost made the
You
connection.
almost made it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Repeat that one more time. The Davo. One more
Davo,
time. Mhm.
So D, deny,
Deny,
A, accuse the other person,
accuse.
and then
Hmm.
reverse the victim offender. So you say to me like,
Wow.
hey, Ben, what you said was racist. And I say, no, it's not. I've got two black friends. and then and then I accuse you of doing wrong. And then I say, how could you treat me this way
Oh
after
God.
everything I've done for you?
Mm.
And so
Oh,
it's
the
this great
guilty
kind
thing.
of narcissist skill. And so people will say to me, well, that's narcissistic behavior. Yes, that's what white people suffer from. That's why they
Yeah.
don't like that's the whole conversation you and I are having today is you're saying, well,
Right.
Ben, how do we undo narcissism? Like there's not many treatment modalities for narcissism. It's a tough personality disorder to break.
Yeah. I wish we had a pill, you know? I wish we had like a pill to give somebody and say, here's your racism pill for the day. I
Mhm.
don't know. Just to see if maybe that might help. How do
Mhm.
you deal with the fact that even on your podcast, how has your podcast been received and what are some of the comments and feedback? I mean, I think I noticed on one of your posts, someone said, it was rather nasty. I think about your wife. They just said about, oh, because you're married to a black woman, now you think you're like, you're so smart and so on and so forth. And I think you posted it and just kind of showed everybody. But how does that really affect you anymore? Are you beyond it? Like for me, I'm like, whatever. Like
Mhm.
I battled cancer. That was a worse fight than this. Like this right here, this is easy. I can deal with this. I can speak my mind and not be offended by someone who says whatever they say to me like that.
So I think the post you're referring to was one where they called her a gorilla and said,
Yes, that's one.
yeah,
Hmm.
does she get tired of just being lazy, blah, 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 blah. So once again, like with autism, I think I'm less impacted by that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I've worked with sex offenders and sociopaths for a long, long time, and I was always able to just compartmentalize that. Um, Sometimes I see it as a bit of progress. Like if these people are engaging, then that might be the first step. You see the same thing with
Hmm.
sociopaths. Like if you can kind of tap into their emotions a bit, then you see
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
step. But yeah, I think what blows my mind with this kind of stuff is people will say to me, America's not racist. And I say, hey, someone called my wife this on TikTok the other day, like, well, you should expect that on social media, but not if there's not racism. Like,
Right. Yeah.
racism
Yeah.
has to exist in order for that to be accepted.
Right.
And
Right.
so white people are full of this dissonance, right? Like, I feel like as white people, we're born into being very emotionally reactive, tons of cognitive dissonance, and an inability to align our behaviors with what we say are our goals.
Hmm. Oh wow. There's a lot to unpack there. That's all so true. I see it. I so see it. I could talk to you forever. What do you think the role of the media is in, I don't know, maybe having more conversations like this, um, making sure that even from a television show perspective or even films, that we're not, um, I don't know, maybe presenting the images of the stereotypical kind of images, if you will, of Black people. As someone who was in the media for so many years, a lot of time, we always say if it bleeds, it leads. The top story was always about some shooting or something that happened on whatever side of town, and if it included people who were people of color, there's this prejudicial, attitude, if you will, or perception about that. Is that, oh, these Black people are always killing
Mhm,
each other.
mhm,
This on black crime. Yet we never talk about there's really no such thing as black on black crime. It really is about crime. It's about proximity.
mhm,
More white people will commit crimes against white people versus, more
mhm.
Black people commit crimes against Black people. But yet there's this conversation that we're going to weed out crime. How do we unpack that and allow the media to not just tell the true story, but for people like you, if you will, to be part of that conversation on a more global level to really help people understand that in and of itself is a form of continuing to perpetuate the stereotypes and racism that exists. And if we continue to do that, then we won't grow, we won't learn, we won't become better.
Mhm. So there was a headline in the Guardian newspaper a few weeks ago
Hmm.
that talked about how an Israeli individual had been murdered and a Palestinian individual had been shot. and you see the difference in the language and how it reflects
Yes.
intention. And so I see
Murder
this in the
mystery.
American media all the time. I think there's another layer to this, though, right? Like you already know all this stuff. You've grown it, you've lived it,
Yeah.
and yet people, I'm finding that the members of the BIPOC community want a white person to say it. And so this is
Hmm.
stuff you've been telling people for years and years and years, and white people have just closed their ears to you. Now you have
Hmm.
me telling you all this stuff that you already know, that you've grown up and experienced, and you have to listen to me say it because there's this perhaps belief that white people don't listen to us. Maybe they'll listen to this dude. Like maybe they'll listen to.
Right.
And
Well, there's that spirit, I think, of validity. I think all of us have been taught um, from a cultural perspective that, white voices matter more, that white voices are believed, that white people's lives and issues and concerns, once you say that it's a concern, then the rest of
then
the
it's
world
only
says
matters.
it's an issue. And I
Mhm.
mean, think about that. I mean, let's talk about the Me Too movement. That was actually created by a Black woman, but only until a white woman or white people decided to jump on board.
Mhm.
And then they said, well, Me Too. Then all of a sudden, the Me Too movement really became a Me Too movement. And all of these issues, as it related to Black women who were being discriminated against, who were being sexually assaulted, Black women and girls, Black children who were being kidnapped and who were missing. None of those issues were important when we were saying that. But all of a sudden now, because the Me Too movement and white women said, oh, poor us, the suffrage that we have been, and I'm not mitigating that. I'm not saying that they're not important, but it's this notion that because white women say it, that it's more important, because a white man says it, that it's more
Mhm.
important. So yeah, there's that perception that you make things valid.
Mhm.
We are complainers, but you make it valid. If we have a
Mhm.
white sponsor, then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, then it's legitimate.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm more than happy to serve in that role. I think I'm just continually disgusted by that dynamic.
Yeah, yeah. It is disgusting. It is disgusting.
But the other part that happens too, right, is not only do white people start listening when white people join the movement, but then the white people would want to take control of the movement and want to really
That's
make it
it.
about their own needs. And you're like, hey, let's talk about intersectional feminism. Well, no.
Yeah, right.
Now that white
Yeah,
women are in control, it's going to be about their needs. And so I think
yeah.
there's so many of those conversations that need to be had too.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack. It's
Mm.
not just one. It's not linear. There's so
Mhm.
many different issues that are all connected. What do you see for yourself and for your company as you continue to speak to people and um, try to bring some knowledge to folks and to help them understand who they are and even the history of this world and of this country, and how that still plays a role, very pivotal role in how we see each other, how we treat one another, and how we view what's good, what's not good, and what's valid and what isn't, what's invalid, especially as it relates to race.
Mhm.
What do you see that happening for you in the future?
So one of the things I really enjoy doing right now is, even though I talk about white people shit, and my goal is really to help white people unpack it, I get contacted by a lot of non-white people who want to better understand how white people operate. And
But don't
so,
you think we already know that? I mean, I think
yes,
for
yeah,
most Black people, we know how y'all operate, because we're all, I hate to say it, we are 2 steps, 5 steps, 10 steps ahead of you, because we have been
Mhm,
taught, not only do you have to be 5, 10, 15 times
mhm.
better than, we have studied you all. We know your steps sometimes before you make a step, before you even know you're going to walk. And that's the truth.
Yeah. And so I think what I mean by that is they'll be in a difficult situation at work and
Hmm.
they will contact me and be like, Ben, how do I navigate this? And so I really enjoy that kind of work, which is supporting communities of color deal with white people shit at work, um, and trying to give them a sense of helping them feel seen, like helping them feel heard, and validating all the problems they're having, because oftentimes HR does not. HR kind of weaponizes it and meets the needs of the company first. But then also kind of equipping them with a certain sense of, this is the reality. How are you going to
Hmm.
operate in this in a way that you stay sane? That this
Yeah.
doesn't impact your family, doesn't impact your home life. And so I
Yes.
really enjoy that kind of work, and to just keep speaking up about this. And who knows, maybe there'll be some white people who are like, yeah, okay, I'm willing to do this kind of work. And it does happen time to time.
Mhm.
But a sad reality is, I think DEI companies that are willing to placate white people are going to take over that scene.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're seeing so many, Black women who are part of the DEI movement who are now saying, I'm out, I'm tapped out because I'm trying to do some work.
Mhm.
I'm trying to do good work, but the white folks don't want to listen. And they're like, no. And so now all of a sudden they're like, oh, we don't need DEI. So
Mhm.
again, we're back to that whole performative issue. Last couple of questions, there was one situation during my depositions when I was suing Tegna where their attorney, are you ready for this, said, well, you claim that the news director was being racist towards you. And she gave a couple of scenarios. She says, so did you tell him that he was being racist? In other words, insinuating, because I never said that
Mhm.
that you're being racist, that there was no racial discrimination. And I just sat there and I just took a couple of beats, some deep breaths, and I said, has anyone ever told you that you were a racist? And how did that conversation go?
Mhm.
And in that moment, I could tell there was this, her face got very red and she began to kind of ruffle her papers because what I was not going to do was to sit there for someone to play semantics with me
Mhm.
and for someone to pretend as if what I experienced was not what I experienced, which was
Mhm.
the truth. But for her to have said something like that to me, that I am at fault for not telling them he was being racist. But had I told him he was racist, and if he had said no, then what? Like, what's the end goal that you're trying to prove? What do you believe about that statement? And does that really kind of validate what you've been saying about white people's you know what? And the fact that they really don't understand it. Obviously, they don't. Because to say something like that to me was probably one of the most horrendous things I think I've ever heard anyone say. Well, you never told him it was racist, so it's your fault if you were being treated like that because he didn't know that he was being racist. So again, it's putting the onus on me as a Black person, as a Black woman, to tell you, then all you're going to do is deny it. So it's this
Mhm.
circuitous, this hamster on the wheel. We're getting nowhere. We're getting nowhere. I'm chasing my tail and we're getting nowhere. And you get to the chance to walk away and not be held accountable.
So white people shit has these like main ingredients, right? One of them is gaslighting other people so that you
Oh,
start to feel insane. And the
tell me
other
about
thing
it.
is we love to put work on other people. we love,
Yes.
and so I love in ironic terms, but I love that she said, hey, it's your responsibility to point out other people's bad behavior. It has nothing to do with their responsibility to fix it. And that is the most white people shit you will hear, of this sense of like, hey, if white people are behaving badly, that's really other people's responsibility to fix.
Mhm,
And you
mhm,
see the
mhm.
same thing with males talking about domestic violence or sexual violence. Like,
Right.
well, I didn't know hitting her was a problem. Like, she should
Right.
have said she didn't like being hit. Like, this is what
Mm.
people do. So yeah, that's some super white people shit. I'm not surprised, and I'm sorry you've experienced all this.
Well, I appreciate that. We appreciate you. We will definitely have you back because you are you are a breath of fresh air. Besides my brother-in-law, I mean, having this conversation with you has been amazing. And I love the work that you are doing in this space. And so you are welcome at any time. What is your personal hope for the future as we say goodbye?
For white people to let go of their hopes for the future and to
Mm,
really get comfortable with the present moment and all the difficulties of the present moment and not try to escape it.
very well said. Very well said. There's something that I say at the end of all of these YouTube shows and podcasts, and that is, if no one else believes your story, I do. I believe your story. I see you and I hear you. And thriving for all of us. Thriving is not a privilege just for white people.
Mm-hmm.
Thriving is the birthright for all of us. You say what to that?
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ben, the
Thank
curious.
you.
Thank you for being curious. Thank you for doing the work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I cannot say thank you enough. You are amazing.
Likewise. I appreciate
You're
you.
amazing.
Curious Ben is a friend of our show, and we look forward to having him back. Please support and follow him as he teaches about the intersection of curiosity and compassion, and how they lead all of us to healing and growth. And don't forget to catch his podcast with his wife, Jamisa.